we'll be fine. I see people in the parking lot talking and working their way in here, so we'll give them an opportunity. But we're wrapping up Daniel tonight. We'll be done with Daniel. And we're taking the last 10 verses of Daniel 11 tonight, along with all of Daniel chapter 12. And so we'll wrap it up, and then we'll decide whether we want to go to Revelation. There are some books that I like, but we can also, I don't see anywhere in the Adventist church, but I mean, I could be wrong. I sure have been looking for a verse-by-verse study guide of the book of Revelation. If you've got one, Ted.
Well, no, I thought Tony has Revelation chapter and time. You read it and explain it, and then we fill in the blanks.
This is the one in the back there. It's all Revelation.
Revelation chapter 1, chapter 2.
Oh, well then let's use that one.
You look at it and see.
All right, I'll grab it tonight.
It's the Revelation Now study guide.
Is that what he took it?
So, yeah.
But it's back there against the wall?
Yeah. You'll have Revelation chapter 1, chapter
All right.
2.
Well, then that might be the best thing.
Add to it what you'd add to it.
We could, it was back in 2019 already, over 2 years ago, that our lesson quarterly covered the book of Revelation. And so we could, of course, that was broken down into 13 weeks. And so we could, Hope is still, Hope Channel still has it. All kinds of places still have the 13 study guides that go with that. Yeah, that's two sheets, Ken. And, all right, well, let me look at this thing from Tony then. And that might be what we use if it goes verse by verse, chapter by chapter, because that's what I kind of wanted to do. Just like we did for Daniel, my pace now is beginning to pick up. As we open back up, as we're doing more things, all of a sudden, pastor. I don't have time to sit at home and write study guides. And so we're going to have to let me do something else. I got too many people screaming at me to do this and do that. And so we just don't have time to write study guides. And so let me use someone else's study guide. And that way I don't have to take up those. It takes me a couple of hours. All right. And so we'll take a look at that study, and we'll see how that goes. I'll let you know. And we'll start with Revelation, but that'll be great. But yeah, we'll get to the chart toward the end of our study. It's right at the end of Revelation 12 that those two new time periods are introduced, and we normally don't focus on those two, and they don't change anything. But don't know if we've still got people in the parking lot. Well, we got people in the parking lot, but I don't know if they're part of us or if they're doing something else. But it might be pathfinders or adventurers or whatever they're doing.
Or Ted, he might have decided to leave.
No, Ted's just getting me some studies that we will look at. So we'll give him just a moment or two to get back, and then we'll begin and wrap up Daniel. Daniel chapter 10, 11, and 12, we divide it up in chapters, but it's a package deal. It's one vision, and the vision that he receives has nothing to do with leopards and lions and metal man. It's all pretty straightforward, and so that makes it real interesting. But we'll look at it here. We'll just give another moment for anyone else to walk in, and then we will get started.
You know when they say like the 24th day of the first month, it was their first month. Like when I was living in Iran, their first month. I mean, their New Year's is April. It's the spring.
It is.
So they don't do January.
They do not.
So would the 24th day of the first month, would their first month be the beginning of spring? Would it be like
Yeah.
March or April?
Yeah. exactly right. Yeah, they don't go January through December. They go spring to spring, or spring to, yeah. Spring was always the beginning of their new year. That's just the way it was in Bible times.
Actually, technically, they had 2 years.
Well,
They had a legal year and they had a religious
they had a religious year, and
The religious year is in the spring, I believe.
I suppose,
Religious year is in the fall.
but pagan nations, always the spring pretty much. But Israel, David is right. They looked at watched a couple of calendars. But, okay. Everybody got a study guide for us to get started? We will have a word of prayer, and we'll begin. Those of you who are watching on live stream, that's great, but starting when we start the study in Revelation, that's going to have a lot of questions and a lot of audience participation, and so I'm not sure we'll continue live streaming. But we can let you set up way over there away from everybody if you want to, but I don't want to encourage you to stay home. And I like discussion much more than just me standing here talking, and I feel like, well, you got to stand here and talk a little bit when we're live streaming. And so we might cut off the live stream. When we have this past Sabbath, we had 131 people in the sanctuary, and we had 44 units watching, and so we'll keep doing it during church service, but we just don't have that many watching at prayer meeting time. All right, well, let's begin with a word of prayer. Loving Father in heaven, we thank you so much that we can be here tonight. We pray for your blessing, your guidance as we wrap up our study on the wonderful book of Daniel. We thank you so much for the book of Daniel. It means so much to the Adventist church and to prophecy, and so we thank you that we can have it as an open book in our day-to-day. So bless us tonight. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right, let's first of all begin with just reading Daniel 11, 36 through 39. So someone turn to Daniel 11, 36 through 39 as we get started.
At that time, Michael the archangel.
No, Daniel 11. Daniel 11, 36 through 39. We will get there though, Gail.
It's okay. Sorry. Have my mind on something else. 36. The king will do as he pleases, exalting himself and claiming to be greater than every god, even blaspheming the God of gods. He will succeed, but only until the time of wrath is completed. For what has been determined will surely take place. He will have no respect for the gods of his ancestors, or for the god loved by women, or for any other god, for he will boast that he is greater than them all.
Okay. Now, well, let me just read this and then we'll talk about it. There are two schools of thoughts concerning the last 10 verses of Daniel 11. We see a new power introduced in verse 36, namely this king who would speak blasphemies against the God of gods. For the first 100 years of Adventism, there was a general consensus that this figure is identified with the atheistic power of France. However, Martin Luther, the German reformer, maintained that the last 10 verses referred to the papacy. Some suggest it could be a blending of both thoughts. Both France and the papacy were each horrible prosecutors of Protestants. Did you know that they both changed the day of worship? Did you know that? Yeah. Of course we know the papacy changed the day of worship. But so did they during the French Revolution. And by the way, the French Revolution and the power of the French Revolution and then its fall and the power of the papacy and its fall, you realize that's all happening at the same time. All happening at the same time. But just a little bit about the French Revolution that Early Adventism thought that this was pointing to, simply because that was in the next line of events, as we talked about the king of the north and the king of the south, and we proceeded last time past Cleopatra and all of this. And so Rome becomes the power, and then pagan Rome self-destructs. But just to speak of the French Revolution, and then we'll talk about maybe the self-destruction of Rome in a few moments. But the French Revolution, it happened, of course, we're well aware of King Louis XVI was on the throne when the French Revolution happened. His queen, anybody remember her queen's name? Marie Antoinette. She never did really say, "Let them eat cake." She was quoted that, but she didn't say it. But she was an extravagant spender, and that was part of the problem. But the French Revolution, 1789 to 1799. And you remember the papacy falls in 1798 to Napoleon. So this is all happening about the same time. But King Louis was convinced by our very good buddy Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin was, of course, our influence in the court of France for the American Revolution. He talked France into helping us. I'm not sure we would have won the American Revolution without the aid of France. They didn't start up right at first, but they certainly helped us as things went along. With our own revolution in 1776, they kind of got on board in 1779 and helped us wrap this thing up. But in order to do that, Louis just about bankrupted the nation of France. At the same time, between 1700 and Louis's reign, the population of France exploded. It went from 16 million to almost 30 million in that 80-year period. They had, so this massive burst of population, they spent huge amounts of money, well worth, we think. America got started, and France got to stick it in the eye of their arch enemy, the English, and so the French were happy to do that. But now you've got a bankrupt nation and a population that's exploding. People are out of work, they're going hungry, they're beginning to complain. The nobility, the rich families, they begin to complain to Louis, "You need to do something. All right, let's put a council together and we'll solve the problem." Their problem was they put a council together of themselves, just the rich. Didn't fly well with 90% of the population of France. And so you have the storming of the Bastille, and the French Revolution was on, and the French Revolution was against everything religious, everything against the nobility. In fact, King Louis and Marie, what happened to them? Guillotine. Now, the guillotine's a famous picture of the French Revolution, but out of the some 60,000 people that they killed during that 10-year span, only about 3,000 were actually guillotined. Most of them, they just took them out and shot them. But they tried to shoot as many of the noble and the rich as they could. The church, man, were they after the church. They hated the Church of Rome. They wanted out from under them. They confiscated all the monasteries, kicked out the priests, shot some. But this is what the French Revolution did as far as religion. They came up with a new week design, a 10-day week. Why? So nobody could find a day of worship. And so they stopped worship. You weren't allowed to worship. Protestants were killed by the thousands, and church members were killed by the thousands. And so it didn't matter if you were for Christ, we kill you. And they set up all kinds of new things with the Women's March on the Palace of Versailles was basically the end of Louis's term. The Women's March. They marched on the Palace of Versailles. Price of bread had gone up, and they were just sick and tired of it. And here's a bunch of women marching on the Palace of Versailles. Of course, men would join them. And Louis came out rather willingly, and he was hauled off to Paris. Of course, the Palace of Versailles, 12, 14 miles from Paris, southwest of Paris. And so they take him to Paris, and he and Marie are thrown into jail there. And for the next year, they're in jail before they chop their heads off. But Napoleon would come along toward the second half of the Revolution, and he's the one who puts the end to the French Revolution. He doesn't want a revolution. He wants to be dictator. And so he takes over the government. And guess what? He's still not on the favor of Protestants and Catholics. He still doesn't like them at all. So not only does he confiscates the monasteries, he strips them of their financial wealth, and of course in 1798 has the Pope arrested and hauled away in prison, put in prison, and about 18 months later that Pope dies. So the French Revolution certainly could be seen in these paragraphs, in these verses, like the Adventists said, for some 100 years. However, you can also see the papacy in this same scenario. Could it be a blending of both? Don't know. Again, some people see the battle. Napoleon defeats the Turks, the king of the north. He defeats Egypt, the king of the south. But of course, England to the east and Prussia to the north. In fact, maybe we better read that. Daniel 11, 40 through 45. Daniel 11, 40 through 45.
And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall enter into the country, and shall overflow and pass over. He shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom, and Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. Tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy, and utterly to make away many. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall hold him.
It really fits Napoleon real well. So I can certainly understand why that thinking has come about. The prophetic events in these verses occur during the time of the end. Janet there used that term. The term time of the end, which appears 5 times in the book of Daniel. It's not found in any other Old Testament books. The key to its meaning is found in the vision of Daniel 11. In the concluding part of the vision, a resurrection of the dead is prophesied to take place. Now, we haven't read that yet, but it's in Daniel 12:2. It is this event that holds the key to the proper understanding of the expression time of the end. In Daniel 12:4, the prophet was told to shut up the prophecies and seal the book until the time of the end. Many will then intensely search the book of Daniel. As a result, the knowledge of these prophecies will increase. That is what Daniel was told. From history, we know that in the 19th century, after the end of the 1260 years of Daniel, 725, knowledge of Daniel's prophecies increased dramatically. It is reasonable to then conclude that the time of the end began with the end of papal dominance in 1798. This means that the events from Daniel 11:40 onward must be sought in the time between 1798 and the resurrection at the end of time. And so some suggest that the war of 1798 that involved France, Egypt, and Turkey to be a possible interpretation of the last few verses of Daniel 11. The papacy would be involved, but only in the sense that Pope Pius was taken prisoner and transported to France. He died 18 months later. His reign of over 2 decades, by the way, 5th longest in papal history. Others suggest that these verses actually have as their climax a last great battle, that has yet to take place, and we will only understand it as we see it happening. But there, the king of the south, we've talked about the king of the north and the king of the south, the Ptolemies and the Seleucuses. Seleucuses headquarters in Syria, Ptolemies headquarters in Egypt, and how they kept going back and forth through the glorious land or through Palestine. And one day, Palestine was under the rule of the king of the north, Syria, and the next day they were under Egypt's power. And so it just went back and forth. But here we have Napoleon. He defeats the king of the north, the Turks. He defeats Egypt, the king of the south. Maybe they even have, he basically raided the pyramids. He took everything. He hated Egypt and blamed Egypt for a lot of things. But he defeats both of them. But England to the east and Prussia to the north, the Bible says he's worried about the east and the north. Yeah, he's worried about Prussia and England. Of course, they form an alliance. He should be worried. They form an alliance and defeat him where? Waterloo. And of course, this describes that this great king, this leader, even though he defeats Egypt, even though he defeats the Turks, he's king of the world. But then there's this northern-eastern alliance. And the weather, by the way. Rainy weather that did not allow Napoleon to bring up his reserves. And so Wellington and Prussia were able to defeat him. And so this could be all about France and Napoleon and the French Revolution, because that did happen right there. And of course, Napoleon is defeated after 1798. So that would be in the time of the end. But could it also be the papacy and a later war? And a war that we won't understand until we see it? I don't know. Could be a blending. But the Adventist Church pretty well allows you to veer either direction on these remaining in Daniel chapter 11. So let's look at Daniel chapter 12. Daniel 12 verses 1 through 4. Now, Gail. All right. Now, Michael's going to stand up here in a minute, so let's just, Daniel 12, 1 through 4. Michael is Christ himself. And as he stands, signaling that his ministry as high priest has ended, we see earth will face a time of trouble such as never was since time began. Once in a while, today, we already catch a glimpse of it, don't we? Of the horror that mankind can do. And so we... those who reject the Spirit of God. But there are people who have their names documented in a book who will be delivered. Of course, Revelation 13:8, Philippians 4:3, Revelation 20:15. But Jesus ceases his work as high priest in the heavenly sanctuary. The judgment of all who are at any time have professed the services of God among both the living and the dead must be completed. This inquiry is an investigative or pre-Advent judgment. Revelation 22:11. Remember Daniel and Revelation. Boy, they are companion books. And so it's very difficult to completely study one without realizing the other. But this inquiry is an investigative or pre-Advent judgment. The Bible teaches clearly that there will be two general resurrections of the dead. The first, that of the righteous dead, who will come forth at the second coming of Jesus. Of course, we know that by John 5 and 1 Thessalonians. The second resurrection, that of the wicked, will occur at the close of the 1,000 years. The angel in Daniel 12:2 seems to be speaking about the special resurrection of good and evil people at the second coming. Let's turn to that one, Revelation 1:7. Revelation 1:7. Let's get that with our... Someone read that.
Behold, he cometh with clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him, and all kindreds of the earth shall wail because of him. Even so, amen.
Yeah. And then we, in verse 12, and many of those who sleep in this is Daniel 12:2, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. And so, as Seventh-day Adventists, and because Jesus point blank told the high priest, the next time you see me, I'll be coming in the clouds of glory. And so there is going to be this special resurrection, if that's what you want to call it, of good people and bad people. How many of their names do we know? We know the high priest, just simply because Jesus stated him. You want to guess that maybe Pilate. You want to guess that maybe Herod. Those that pierced him seems to be the line of thought as far as the wicked lost. They're going to be raised from the dead to see Jesus return and then be killed by the brightness of his coming. But then there are also going to be people who are good that maybe... You tell me how this thing is going to work. Are the dead in Christ, are they all going to see the little cloud? Ellen White describes it, a little cloud. When does the resurrection happen in connection with the second coming? Exactly when does that take place? Yeah, So in other words, are there going to be some righteous who are resurrected a little bit earlier than the rest of the general population of the righteous? Because all the righteous get raised, right? Second coming of Jesus, they're all raised. But do they see the early stages of the second coming?
Well, it does say they are raised before the righteous living are translated.
Okay.
It does say that.
Yeah. I don't think anybody's left the ground. The righteous in their graves, they say those who are living aren't going to precede you. So all seem to go up at the same time. But is there going to be a special resurrection? And I never can get a definitive answer from anybody. Is there going to be a special resurrection of some righteous so that they can get there just a little earlier? I don't.
Get a better seat.
Better seat? Yeah. Janet says they get a better seat. Because there does seem to be some things happening before the trump. Doesn't there? Seems to be. The little cloud grows. All of a sudden there's ground is shaking and...
I can't be for sure, but it seems like I read in the Spirit of Prophecy that some would be raised a little early to see the end time
Yeah.
happen. I think one might have been Daniel. I can't remember.
But is it how early or when? I don't know. We leave those things to the Lord. But it seems to be that's what Gabriel seems to be suggesting, is that some good people are going to be raised early also. Oh, why? They're all raised. I mean, aren't they? They're all coming back to life. Yeah, but we want these people to see some other things, evidently. And yeah. So we will see, but evidently we all keep our feet on the ground for a little while the show starts. The show is going to start. We're going to keep our feet on the ground. Angels are going to, certainly start coming. And then somewhere as Jesus never lands his feet on the earth on this particular occasion. But as he comes in close, Then, his mighty voice, the last trump. Then the graves burst open, and I don't think we've left the ground. Not by the Bible's description, not by Ellen White's description. We meet each other. We meet in the air. We kind of go up together. And so some little interesting things there that we're just not given all the information on. But so interesting that this little special resurrection that's going to take place. All right, we need to spend some time on Daniel 12. Let's see, where did I read that whole thing? Daniel was told to seal up the book, but that it would be opened, studied, and understood at the time of the end. And that's us. We believe, as Seventh-day Adventists, the time of the end began in 1798, because that's where this is connected in the book of Daniel. This is the time of the end when Napoleon is defeated. That's the time of the end. All right. Well, then that's after 1798. Waterloo is in the 1800s. So interesting the way that's going to play out. So Daniel 12, 5 through 7. Daniel 12, 5 through 7. All right. So, how long, when do we get to the time of the end? All right. He gives them this count, and of course this particular time period shows up in about 3 different ways. It's also called the 1260-day for a year prophecy. That's the one we're familiar with. We see that one all the time, and that is the more important of the 3. We know it started in 538 AD with the Justinian decree that all of Rome now is under the authority of the papacy. The papacy is now in charge of what is called the Holy Roman. The empire is now theirs. And so that's when Justinian gives his decree. We count 1260 days from there. You get to 1798, to this time period that we're talking about of the French Revolution. Of course, the American Revolution was just prior to it also, but you got the French Revolution, and you've got connected to the French Revolution when Napoleon takes it over and says, I don't want a revolution, I want to be the dictator. Well, then he also takes the Pope hostage, and the Pope dies. And so the reign of the papacy comes to an end in 1798, and Daniel is told that ushers in the time of the end. And so we're familiar with that 1260-day year prophecy time, 1 year times 2 year. That's 3 plus half a time, 3.5 years in Bible prophecy, or 1260 days, which we know a day for a year. And so it fits so wonderfully from the Justinian decree. Pope is now in charge, and he would be in charge all the way to 1798 when he was no longer in charge. And Napoleon put an end to that. But so we've got that one down. Papal supremacy, 538 AD, 1798. Of course, during that time, the Protestant Reformation would get started, and so many wonderful leaders begin to call out the papacy. And of course, the Bible would get produced in other languages besides Latin. Yeah, Ted.
You know, it's amazing that most people don't understand why we are called Protestants.
Yeah.
We protested what Rome
They're not protesting all that much anymore, but anyway. So let's close it out. Daniel 12, 8 through 13, and let's get these two other time periods that are introduced to us just almost as an afterthought here in the book of Daniel. Daniel 12, 8 through 13.
And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he that waits, and comes to the 1,335 days. But go thou thy way until the end be. For thou shalt rest, and stand in thy lot at the end of the day.
All right. So Daniel is utterly confused, the daylights out of him, and of course he is too. Daniel, we're sealing this up. Don't worry about this stuff. It's for the time of the end. Confuses the daylights out of us too, for that matter, half the time. But we've got two extra time periods thrown in right here at the end. We're familiar with the 1260-day year prophecy of the papacy supremacy, but these two are thrown in, and David read there, from the time that it is started, or I think it was set up in the version that you read. When this is first set up, when this is first started, it's 1290 years instead of 1260. And so 30 years are added. It appears that 1798 is still the date that we're aiming for, but from the day it started. Well, what in the world started then 30 years before in 508? Interesting story. King Clovis, he's the king of the Franks. The Franks became what? French. He's king of the Franks. He's basically unified the entire area of France and a little bit of Brussels and different areas, that all under his rule, under one kingship. All the tribes are now under him. To kind of make an alliance with the Visigoths. By the way, who do the Visigoths become? They become Spain. And so the king of the Visigoths and the king of the Franks, they're trying to make friends. And so it is decided that Clovis would marry the daughter of the king of the Visigoths. They still did this kind of thing, you know. And so her name was Clotilda. And so he marries Clotilda, but though it was for political reasons, evidently they actually kind of get along. They kind of like each other, even though Clovis is 30 years older than his new queen. But one thing, she's religious. She's Catholic. She's following the Church of Rome. Clovis hadn't followed nothing, you know. He's king of the Franks. And so after they are married, they would be married about 18 years, and about in the 14th, 15th year of their marriage, she has convinced him to pay homage to the Pope. So for the very first time, David said, when it began, when it was set up, when it got started, from that date, it's going to be 1,290 years instead of 1,260. When it got started. For the very first time in all the world, a king went to Rome. He traveled from France to Rome and bowed the knee. First time. He and his wife went to Rome. He bowed the knee, paid homage to the Pope. That is the very first time a king paid homage. Now, over those next 30 years, by the time Justinian makes his decree, all kings bowed the knee. But this was at the beginning. This is when it started. And Daniel was told, well, from when it starts, when it is set up, it's 1,290 years that that papacy will be in charge. Now again, papacy wasn't in charge of everybody, but the Franks, it's interesting to me that the Franks, or France, they're the ones who first knelt to the papacy, and Napoleon, Frenchman, is the one who took them down. Bookend by France on both ends. France started it, France ended it. France began this prophecy, Napoleon, France ended that prophecy. But then we got this this other one here. What did Daniel say? 1335. Oh, for crying out loud, we got another time period to look at. And blessed is he who goes beyond the end of this prophecy, or happy is he who understands beyond this prophecy. So we got 1335 years. We can start it at that exact same point. Look at your third timeline on that sheet of paper. If it begins now in the year, by the way, in 508, Clovis bows the knee. He comes back in 509 to France and demands that everybody pay homage to the Pope. And so you have this kind of overlapping of about 6 months. Took him to travel, come back home, and demand of his nation. He brought cardinals with him. He brought representatives of the Pope to France. And now France was ruled under the eyes of the papacy. But also, Daniel, 1335 days starting from when King Clovis converts. Now, if you do that, what year do you get to? 1844. And David read that they will be blessed. They will be, those people in 1843, 1844, they will be happy when they get beyond it and understand it. Wow. And so these two additional time periods are just making sure that we got that first one there, that 1260, that we got it correct. But you think, good night, you're throwing more time periods at us. But it's not all that complicated. And you just have a new beginning. When it started, when it was set up by King Clovis and his wife in 508, and then that same time period, if you bring it 1335 years forward, 1843, 1844, and when those people get past it, they're going to be happy when they understand it. Wow. Ted.
So wasn't it at one point, wasn't the French the one that tried to do away with the Bible?
Oh, during the French Revolution, they burned Bibles. Oh yeah, destroyed every Bible they could get their hands on.
It's amazing yet they bow to the Pope.
Well, they bowed to the Pope here in 508 AD, but by 1798, they're in no mood to bow to the Pope. They've had it up to here with the Pope. And France was starving. They blamed the nobility, the king, and they blamed the Pope. Those are the two people they blamed for their trouble. Probably both were right. King Louis could really be a jerk, completely kind of organized, and the papacy milked them, just milked them.
Well, in many cases, in France and elsewhere here, the priesthood owned more property
Oh!
than the nobles did.
Yeah, so when Napoleon came in, he stripped them. So not only did he arrest the Pope and haul him away, he took over all the monasteries, there wasn't a priest left in France. He kicked them all out, or shot them if they thought they should stay. He just shot them. And then he confiscated all the monasteries and gave it or sold it to the people. Monasteries were all gone. I didn't know this, I just read it just this week, but some 25,000 priests were in France when the French Revolution got started. 25,000 priests in France. They dominated that country because they're the first ones who started it. And so they let them in, and so all these priests in their monasteries had to go. By the way, when King Clovis died just 3 years after this, his wife, I told you she was quite a bit younger, she would live another 35 years. and she would become a nun. She would not remarry. She would become a nun. And she is today, has been sainted. She's a saint because of the wonderful work that she did on her husband in bringing the entire Frank nation, French, into the Catholic fold. So, interesting how it all played out. Yeah, Ted?
You know, it's amazing now how our government, I saw a little skit that said the president had counsel with president about what was going on.
Yeah. Well, they'll, whether it's Biden or not, and I have no way to predict, but sooner or later, this world will look to the Pope to solve their problems, because Biden or anybody else is going to be able to solve them. And so eventually the Pope will step in and have authority. He already is voicing his opinion about a day of rest and how that would be good for the country, the world. I happen to agree with him. I do believe a day of rest is good for the world. We're just going to disagree on, we're going to disagree greatly on exactly when that should take place. But I do agree that a day of rest is wonderful. Wonderful. All right. Prayer request. We're going to look at Revelation next week, and so we'll see if we want to use these